Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and today I'm joined by the Data Boys. Get those hands up, Data Boys.
You don't have to do everything he says.
Oh, well, fine. Anyway, it's Mark Carey.
Hello, Joe.
It's Tom Harris.
Hi, Joe.
And it's Connor O'Neill.
Hello, Joe.
All right, how's it going? Everyone happy?
Very happy. Delighted.
Delighted. Well, here's all the things that we talked about in today's episode. We do a statistical preview of Liverpool Arsenal. We sort of do that, don't we? I mean, we actually kind of acknowledge how difficult it is, to decipher what's going to happen between Liverpool and Arsenal, just in a sort of ordinary human way. And also, we talk about sample sizes. We reflect on the early fixtures of the Premier League season and what we can glean from it. You've used the word glean here, Steve.
I have.
I like the word glean.
Good, isn't it?
We don't use glean enough as a society, do we?
No.
No. Okay. Well, let's correct that. Let's try and use the word glean once every podcast for the rest of the season.
Noted.
Challenge accepted.
Okay.
Okay. Tom hates XG, and we find out why. Also, we find out that Tom has never been angry, despite being in a close romantic relationship. I don't believe it. What else? Oh, the deepest dive came when we discussed owls and other birds of prey.
Yeah, my favourite bird.
Yeah, the barn owl.
To be continued.
To be continued. My favourite is the Harris Hawk. Okay. Connor met Billy Beane, who is otherwise known as Brad Pitt, although he didn't meet Brad Pitt. He met Billy Beane. So we talk about that. And since he wasn't here to defend himself, we picked apart John McKenzie's arguments about data. And then we put it back together again respectfully and agreed that he was sort of correct. You know?
I think I was on John's side throughout there.
You sort of were, but it's more fun to sort of pretend that we were on the other side.
True. We kicked it around a bit, didn't
Yeah, let's get him.
Yeah.
Okay, is that it?
That's it.
Great. Well, enjoy the episode, everyone. Were you going to say something?
No, so I thought he said that's it, as in we're done. It's a wrap.
No. This is still the
going.
intro.
Yeah.
This is in the show still now.
Wow.
You want to say anything else?
No.
He doesn't want to say anything. Where else to begin, of course, than with the football that will be happening very soon, Mark? There's a huge game at the weekend. I believe you know the game to which I refer. Is it at the Emirates? Is it Arsenal-Liverpool or is it Liverpool-Arsenal?
It is Liverpool-Arsenal.
Oh, it's at Anfield.
At Anfield.
Okay, great. I mean, I haven't spoken to you yet this season, so I'm curious, just as a starting point, to hear what you're making of both teams, what your expectation for that game is. Because we had it on Points of Ad this week. We made predictions, and I think it's fair to say none of us had any clue what was going to happen.
No, and I think that's fair, that we don't really have any clue. And I don't want to shut the whole conversation down already, but at the stage that we're at in the season, I suppose this is why you've got us on, from a data perspective, is that it is just so early to tell, and people want to have predictions ahead of the season. They want to infer things from a game or two games across the course of the season, and it is just so difficult to do. So I'm not going to do it that much. That being said, I do think that the narratives, I guess, are true, with Liverpool being quite vulnerable on the counter-attack, vulnerable defensively, full stop. I think that there are caveats as to why that may be. They played against, if you include the Crystal Palace game, Crystal Palace, Newcastle and Bournemouth, three teams who work really well in the transitional moments and really intense in and out of possession, which is arguably Liverpool's sort of kryptonite at the moment anyway. You maybe come up against a deep block and you'll see Liverpool playing in a slightly different way. So I think the style of the opposition they're playing feeds into the narrative of why Liverpool maybe are struggling as well. Not just that they are objectively struggling and are weak, shall we say. But I do think they still need to have the new signings integrated a little bit more. It's going to take time. I think Milos Kerkez has been a little bit weak, again, in and out of possession, especially in the Newcastle game where he just let Guimaraes just jump all over him for that header. Florian Wirtz is a fantastic player, do not get me wrong. I think he still needs to kind of get up to speed. And Connor and I were speaking about it this morning, about him just realising that there's just half a second that he's not able to have on the ball in the Premier League that he was otherwise able to have in the Bundesliga as well.
It's kind of fun when you see that in a new player, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
even when they're up to the challenge, but in the first couple of games where you
Yeah.
just see them realise,
Yeah.
oh.
And they will, like those sorts of players do adapt, but it is just an adaptation. And then you think about the adaptation of Victor Gyökeres for Arsenal as well. Like, there's so much narrative around him to do well, and there was the pressure for him to score on his debut. And if he hadn't have scored against Leeds, like would there have been even more intensity and pressure? It's a lot now, and I think it's probably again speaks to the chat that we're going to have. It speaks to the world that we're living in now, that it is all about trying to use maybe data as a stick to beat players down with after 2 games, or if it's not instant impact, the instant gratification, the culture and the world that we live in, then it's binary. If it's not great, it's terrible. And I do think that he's going to have some time to settle in. Done well in the early weeks, working the channels and offering Arsenal something which they haven't had previously, and Arteta said as much, and they're going to channel that and use that more in the season ahead. So has that been a good enough preview for the weekend? I think it's an exciting game already at the start of the season, and obviously with them both having 100% records so far, 2 games, small sample. It will be interesting to see if one can at least start to pull away a little bit.
I think the fun thing about the beginning of a season, though, is that anything remains possible. You know, you guys, the data boys with a Z, as I've termed you, I don't know, without consent, I've decided to call them that. The data boys. You're obviously, you want 10 games, 20 games, 1,000 games, because the bigger the sample size, the more, I guess, the more accurate your take can be. Whereas me, ordinary fan, representative of the people, the masses, me, the person who's most like all of the other people outside of it, me, like me. I like it now when I don't know, because I feel as though Gyökeres could be a complete disaster, or he could be one of the best strikers that's ever played at Arsenal. And all of those possibilities remain true today. In a way, you'll ruin that in about 10 games' time. How many games before you ruin that, Mark?
That's a really interesting question, something I was going to say about. I think I've done it 2 seasons in a row now, and Duncan Alexander, my editor, has already earmarked me to do the same this season, that it is about 10 games. And it's remarkable that I've done a correlation and looking at the relationship between how the table looks after 10 games and the end of the season. And it is remarkably close.
How close was it last year?
Put me on the spot now. I do not know.
Okay.
But it basically, the correlation, the relationship goes up at a sharp rate until about 10 games, 10 to 12 games, and then it does kind of level off. And of course, there are going to be sort of subtle shifts. And let's have it right, like the subtle shift between runners-up and title winners is in position very small, but in importance very big.
So what you're saying is we should only really watch until October, and then we can sack it in for the rest of the year, is that?
On record, you're going to put me on the spot? Okay. Yes, I am. I'm going to look down the camera and say yes.
Okay, fine. Tom Harris, does that mean then that come October, I'll know whether Victor Gyökeres is an all-time great or a complete failure, or more likely somewhere in the middle?
I think it means exactly that, Joe. Yeah.
Okay.
I've been very intrigued by Gyökeres because there was a lot of narrative after that first game against United that he was a little bit off the pace, he looked a bit clunky, but I still think in all of those kind of instances he gave them something that they've not had in a long, long time.
Yeah.
Arsenal last season, there were a few games where they just looked a bit stodgy up against a low block. They ran out of ideas a little bit. I think Hez is going to bring something, creativity, inspiration, individuality. Gyökeres is exactly the same. And I think if we're, this Piero Hincapié deal.
That's our Ecuadorian left-sided defender, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think this Piero Hincapié deal, which looks like it's nearing completion for Arsenal, is another example of Mikel Arteta saying, look, we just want as many options and as much variety as possible in every single position to give us as many solutions as possible.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think if you're in a position where you can do that, as these teams at the top of the Premier League are, then why not?
Yeah. I think as well with Gyökeres' opening game, the things that he did badly or that made him look bad were all kind of silly. Like, he fell over, trod on the ball, which is funny. He trod on the ball. He did something good and then immediately kicked it over everyone's head. It was a really bad cross. It did. I know this is a bit of a standard comparison, and the data boys probably get sick of hearing about it. But it did make me think of Moneyball, where they signed players who threw the ball weird or ran funny or did something where they had a physical element that made them look like they were doing a bad job, whereas actually the data was able to prove that they were, like you say, offering Arsenal something in that moment that they didn't previously have, even if it looked stupid. So maybe it's actually quite a good example of where, even after just one or two games, where the data can show something other than what you think you're seeing with your eye.
Yeah, absolutely. And his first goal for Arsenal in the Premier League against Leeds is a classic example of a goal that he scored so many times in Portugal.
That's the one where he wins it on the wing and then cuts inside and scores.
He loves it down the left. And then when he cuts inside, we've seen so many examples. This time he went near post. Did he go near post?
Yeah.
Reversed it.
But we've seen him kind of go far post. We've seen him chop onto his left and he can do it there. I think, sometimes it kind of looks predictable. You kind of knew what was going to happen, but he's so powerful. He's so strong. He's so kind of effective. Then, yeah, why not keep on doing it?
No, I agree. And again, from a data perspective, it doesn't even have to be his goal output or his shot output. Those runs that he makes, which he will continue to make, will at least then drag the opposition defence back 5 yards. It'll open up space for maybe Odegaard. It'll open up space for someone else. It will just pull the opposition structure apart. And it is contributing more widely to the team, even if he doesn't touch the ball. I think that's been sort of widely spoken about, but I think it is worth reiterating, especially as the season goes on and he maybe goes 5 games without scoring or something. He's still contributing, you should imagine, to the wider team because he's making runs and stretching the opposition in a way that Arsenal didn't quite do for the past couple of seasons and they came unstuck.
Is there a metric that measures like how much you unsettle the structured, settled defence of the opposition?
That's a good question. There's some work that's been done looking at off-ball runs and the value that they can sort of offer, sort of in a way which we'll come on to in terms of expected threat and possession value. What is it when a player moves from A to B or moves the ball from A to B that they can then contribute to the wider chance of their team scoring? There was some work done by someone called David Sumpter, who owns a company called 12. And the example I always remember is for Roberto Firmino. It was a game against Everton. He basically made a diagonal run from the D to the edge of the box. Really not that much, but it dragged 2 players with him and it opened up space for Sadio Mane. He was able to quantify what that run did. Didn't touch the ball, but what that run did to the overall chance of scoring. So the short answer is, I guess, yes. It's not as kind of widely seen within like the public analytics space, but it is possible to do. And we do things on site in terms of the off-ball runs and the style that a certain player has. So how many runs in behind Victor Gyökeres makes compared to the other strikers across the top 7 European leagues. And you can start to get an idea of what they do without even touching the ball when their team's in possession, to start to get at least a little bit of an idea of style. And then with the numbers to say like how successful are they in value that they offer. It's certainly possible as well. So we're straight into the numbers here.
I mean, even this weekend, right, I can think of 3 examples off the top of my head. There was a Szoboszlai dummy for the Ingram winner at Newcastle. There was Tiano Barry made a great run for Everton to create space. Liam Delap as well in the build-up to one of Chelsea's goals. Happens all the time. And it is the kind of thing that, obviously publicly available data is fantastic, but also there is a lot of eye tests that needs to be done if you're going to evaluate players, because they do a lot of things which at the moment it's not able to quantify. Using only numbers.
I think that's the reason that I like it so much, though, in combination with eye test, because I think the main thing I guess we can agree we all care about is like what the story of the player is and what the truth is about the player. And sometimes that can be misleading from just looking at it. I think about players like Emil Heskey, for example, who I think is like, one of the great forwards of the Premier League era, who was good because his contributions weren't always directly related to goals, but were often indirectly related to goals. And he didn't get maybe the plaudits that he deserved when he played. But I feel like if he played now, he'd be a kind of darling of the data community, probably for that reason. And maybe for the same reason, like a more contemporary example, although he's been praised publicly a lot for the last couple of weeks, but Mason Mount seems to be loved by coaches, for example. It's not always obvious to fans why he's so good, but he presumably makes a lot of off-ball commitments as well. He's very good at pressing, I understand.
Yeah, pressing or sometimes just being in a passing lane between the 2 opposition players, which is crucial. And again, you can start to quantify those things. There's more and more companies that are looking to do that. But yeah, I remember seeing the coverage of that at the weekend. And I think Gary Neville mentioned that you do need those players sometimes, like a Mason Mount. And I think he said back in his day, it was someone like Darren Anderton or Adam Lallana is a bit more of a contemporary example as well. Those players who, it's maybe a bit of a football term as well, but stitch things together and glue things together. You do kind of need that. And again, in the numbers, maybe their assists and goals and chances created aren't the highest, but these are obviously very rudimentary data points and metrics. But in the importance to the wider team is crucial to the extent that, and as a data person, I shouldn't be saying this, you can just ignore the data there. If the person is clearly offering something to the wider team in and out of possession, forget the numbers. Again, I'm on record now saying, forget the numbers. You don't necessarily always need to try and find ways to justify someone's selection in the team. And
it's
Mason
not why
Mount's
the
a good
coaches
example.
love Mason Mount.
Exactly.
They love him because of what they see him do.
And he's a good lad.
And he's a good lad, What about you, Connor? Is there anything from the Premier League season so far that you've noticed that you want to shout about?
I think, as Mark touched on, such a small sample space, but I think that we're kind of seeing a throwback back to Route 1 football a bit.
Yes. So you sound like John McKenzie, and you're sat in his chair as well. Keep talking.
I think when we look at the kind of very first football statistician was this guy called Charles Reap, and his conclusion was get into the mixer. And it kind of ultimately ended up flawed. There's more to it than that. But certainly at throw-ins and kickoffs, we're seeing, 33% of throw-ins have been long throws. Even looking at the Newcastle game the other night, they took 5 long throws. They only took in 1 last season. So it's an area that seems all the analysts over summer went away, did their homework, came to the same conclusion that
Sam Allardyce came to in 1999.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So it's interesting to see us going back to the back to the old times.
John, I don't want to speak for John, although I will. He'll probably tell me on Monday when he comes back on the podcast that I've butchered this. But when I watched a couple of games with him last weekend, or the opening weekend of the Premier League season, and every time a ball was kicked from a centre back or a wide defender into the channel, he'd go, "Well, long ball into the channel." That's what he just kept saying. I think the way that he frames it is it's conservative teams who are afraid to move out of like a settled defensive position, or are afraid to play the ball forwards and displace where their players are. They're more likely in the early stages of the season to want to play with variance a little bit and see if they're I mean, maybe he was just describing Arsenal in that Manchester United game. I'm not sure. I don't know, but I agree with you. I feel like we've seen it from quite a lot of teams. We even saw it a little bit from Manchester City against Wolves, which surprised me a little bit, because I don't think I've ever seen Manchester City play as many long balls as they seem to in that opening game. So maybe it really is a trend.
They do seem to be going more direct, whether it is long balls or just kind of purposeful balls forward. I think you've written on this fairly recently, Tom.
Yeah.
As a City fan as well, you'll have seen the evolution.
Yeah, I mean, what I always remember when Edison first arrived at City, so this was 9-10 years ago now, is that we used to do this thing where Aguero would stand behind the defensive line. He'd stand on the edge of the opposition penalty area because you can't be offside from goal kick. And a few times Edison did go along to Aguero, but a lot of the time it just kind of stretched pitch a little bit and allowed that ball to be played into the midfield. And it happened a few times actually in that Wolves game, where I noticed that Haaland was standing a lot further back than he normally would do. But I think Trafford's distribution in that Wolves game, obviously we can talk about the Tottenham game and the mistake that he made, which was very high profile, but I thought his distribution actually added a lot to City in the way we built up that game, because there was space to exploit in that Wolves press. There were gaps in it, and Trafford quite a lot was inviting pressure and then clipping the ball over into the midfield or clipping out to the wings.
Yeah.
So again, like I said before, kind of with Gyökeres, I think it's, we're kind of in a space where people are now associating long balls with bad build-up, but that's not necessarily the case. There are times when it is very useful, and there are times, again, where it's useful to mix it up and keep other teams on their toes.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is the sort of perfect segue, I think, to move on to talk about like the first or the next topic, which is single number models. Now, I've asked to discuss this because I'm sort of confused by this phenomenon. So I'm hoping that you three will just clear it up completely for me in the duration of this podcast. But James Trafford, as an example, maybe it's sort of cheating a bit to like pick a goalkeeper first to try to explain why I think it seems confusing to me. But he's a good example because he was kind of in some areas against Spurs. He made some obvious mistakes. He looks a bit green. He's a young player, but also his distribution in that Wolves game was great. He clearly made a lot of good impacts on the game too. So the notion that there could be one number, like in a game of FIFA, or I guess less in Football Manager because they have different ratings for different things, don't they? But in a game of FIFA, what do they call it now? EAFC. In EAFC, that there could be one number to summarize how good a player is. That always to me seemed like, well, that's the kind of stuff of video games. And I get why you do that, because I'm 14 years old and I need to know that Kai Havertz at Bayer Leverkusen is only rated 79. That's what I need to know. But I am aware that there are data companies, real data companies in the real world, that are selling services to clubs, or clubs that are building models to try to encapsulate the attributes, the qualities, the level of a player in one single number model, which seems like it's not possible, and yet also I hear so much about it. I feel as though clubs kind of buy into it, so maybe there's something there that I'm just missing, Mark Carey. I mean, I guess I've done a quite poor job of explaining what it is. Maybe as a starting point, can you just tell me what it is in like data boys language?
No, I to be honest, I think the analogy of FIFA, EAFC, is a good one to try and just give, a single number to outline the strength of a player. But I think that's the question that you're asking is precisely the point, that it is filled with nuance. And of course, those numbers, that the single number that is given is going to be, I'm sure, context dependent to the player, in that, you know, comparing strikers, it's going to be within that sample of strikers that they're comparing it to give that overall number compared with a fullback.
So it wouldn't be like, you know, your Man City and your number for Haaland is 93 and your number for James Trafford is 64. It's not like that.
Yeah, because that'd be odd to kind of scale it just on everyone within football, shall we say. But I do think it's an interesting question. It's probably, the answer is probably filled with nuance, and you can see reasons. Connor and I were speaking about this morning. You can see reasons as to why it is used in certain scenarios, why maybe it's used with good reason in certain scenarios as well. But I think if we were to just focus on kind of data companies using it more, I don't want to generalize too much, but I think that given the nature of data growing and continuing to grow among football clubs and having more buy-in, there's still a healthy number of clubs who don't necessarily know how to use it to its absolute full potential. They might not have full-time staff members in the club who are able to use data in a certain way. So therefore, data companies can say that, okay, we can be your consultant, we can provide you with this information, this data, and do it in a way that you don't necessarily need to be super skilled. You don't have to have a data science background to still understand it, because it's one simple number or it's in an accessible way. And there's a lot of companies that I've spoken to in the past that have said, like, now we want to do it so that it's not just the data analyst or the technical person working in the club who can filter through this system. It's a sporting director who might have a bit of a data background, might understand some of the maths, but they don't need to still understand it. So I think it's a good entry point, a good gateway for a lot of clubs to see it as an accessible way to use it. Then, of course, you're then lacking the nuance with it. If you're going to do it that way, then it needs that context that's filled with it, where you actually ultimately do probably need those people with a data science background to start to look at the breakdown, a bit more akin to maybe Football Manager, to say, okay, well, we've got maybe one big number, but there's a whole host of other numbers that we need to start to interrogate. So I think that's sort of maybe from a data company, potentially the pros and cons of it. I can throw it to the guys as well, but I see it probably useful if it's to be maybe a single number model, if it was a bespoke metric within the club. So, for example, I've heard
it's built around their game model.
Exactly right. So I've heard Ian Graham, now former director of research at Liverpool, speak a lot about this with the expected threat or possession value models that they have got bespoke to them based on their game model that they have defined. We see this as important. So using maybe tracking data combined with event data, we want someone who can find space at a premium when we're against a low block, because we're going to dominate the game, but we want someone who's able to wriggle out of trouble and create something out of nothing. For example, putting that into a data model, shall we say, from football speak to data model, to then say, okay, of that, who are the best players who maybe profile the best there? And in our metrics, the single number that comes out, or a short list of players, is maybe then attributable to a single number, rather than just throwing spreadsheets at, important decision makers like coaches, people on the recruitment staff as well. So I guess what I'm saying is I can see why clubs would maybe do it, because the question they're asking is specific, and they can then get a specific number out of it. But if you're doing it maybe at the data company, data consultancies working with clubs, you've then got a general question and you're giving a general answer. So maybe the upside isn't quite as strong, if that makes sense.
So it's about communication. That's it, really, right? Also, is it worth saying that Ian Graham is one of the owners of Ludonautics that offer a single number model as well?
Yeah, and I think that they do work very closely with the clubs. And again, I don't want to generalize too much, because there are data companies who do also work with the clubs to make sure that it fits with their game model to then get a number as well. So I'm wary not to be too broad brushstroke in my answer here. But I mean, on the note of communication as well, I think that's the key thing, which again, data companies are looking to do more generally. And I think that in the age of artificial intelligence and large language models, and I know I'm using technical terms here, but the idea of like ChatGPT, but for football, is that there's a lot of companies I've spoken to and worked with who's basically said, we've now got a platform where as a sporting director, you can say, find me someone who profiles really well in take-ons and crossing the ball very efficiently. Using a large language model, you can then basically go into the data at the back end, do your computations, and it will spit it out as football language and say, here's a short list of XYZ, much like you'll see on the Google AI overview and ChatGPT, etc. So it's trying to make that accessibility more accessible to people who maybe aren't as au fait with data, but knowing that it's absolutely fueled by data. And of course, then the people within the building who are the data analysts, from speaking to people who do work within clubs, they say that you can have the best data models in the world, but that communication, that buy-in, that social intelligence to know actually now's not the time to knock on the coach's door because we did have a frustrating draw a couple of days ago. So I'll maybe wait to pitch this player to the coaches or to the manager for a few days. Like that's actually really crucial to then the wider contribution to the team to maybe say, okay, well, don't do it to the coach, but maybe work with some of the video analysts for a few days and try and find some upside there and inform maybe more about that player by saying, okay, they do this a lot. Can we find examples of this? And then maybe go into the video and find it maybe via an indirect route to still help the club, but knowing when to pounce on data, when not to. I think there's a lot of social intelligence that's required beyond what is just hugely intelligent people working within these clubs.
What do you guys think?
I think I agree in that the single number model can help if you're looking to eliminate confirmation bias. I think in football it's very easy with the amount of numbers and stats there's out there to think, I watch a video of Joe Devine best goals and skills.
I can't believe you pronounced my name. You're a fellow Dubliner, and you're the one person in the room that I would expect to get it right, Connor. I'm absolutely disgusted with you.
I used to know someone called Devine anyway.
I used to know someone called Connor. But...
I think if you look, a video of someone's goals and skills, you can really get hung up on a certain player. And there's kind of a sense that you can slice and dice the data in a way that makes them show up in a good light. You could go really hyper specific, like Joe's got the most through balls received through minute 35 to 40. So I think having one model that's rigorously thought out, we know exactly, the kind of variables we're incorporating, what we're missing. I think that can be helpful in eliminating. We see it a lot on social media of people, selectively comparing, I don't know, Declan Rice with Odegaard, and they're picking very specific stats to feed into their own viewpoint. So I think
to make one of them look better.
Yeah,
than
so
the
I
other.
think there is a reason why these models can be helpful.
And so what you're saying is because you would have control over what the metrics that were fed into them were.
Yeah, it's completely objective in terms of once we've built it and it's there, it's objective. The base of comparison, we're not filtering out certain variables when it doesn't suit, or trying to feed a narrative. Yeah, especially when you're hung up on a player, you've done the video analysis, you're really convinced, but the data doesn't quite tell the story that you want to.
Well, that's one of my questions though, because you said this before, Mark, but you used the example of like having one single number model for your strikers, right? But then when you use the example of Odegaard and Declan Rice, I feel like they're completely different players. Like they're both air quotes midfielders.
Yeah.
But like they don't do the same thing. That in some cases they're not good at the same thing. Surely you couldn't have one single number that could compare those two players together in the same category, right?
No, absolutely not. And I think as well, like team strength and league strength is something we way underestimate. Sometimes I'll see, a striker from the French league compared with,
or a striker from the Portuguese league, of course, that then comes to join Arsenal and finds out it's really
exactly.
hard.
That was a big caveat to a sign-in. So I think, there's a lot of nuance there.
Yeah. Okay.
It's something that we've been intending to work on and sort of are working on in the background, is creating something basically designed around player roles. So as you say, like you think about positions, and this has been widely sort of analysed in recent years, but rather than just thinking, okay, fullback, centre back, defensive midfielder, central midfielder, attacking midfielder, winger and striker, and I've probably missed out a few there, but broadly speaking around positions, as you say, if you just bucket them in such a broad way, then you're not really going to get too many people maybe standing out. But if you say in terms of player roles, using a model that then actually determines, I won't go too much as to what that sort of machine learning is, but a model that allows you to then tease out the different types of fullbacks, for example, an overlapping fullback versus one who kind of tucks in a little bit. Yeah, you can then start to be like, of those, who's maybe doing more or less of something. It doesn't have to necessarily
let
be
me
better
name
or worse.
some more.
Yes, go for it.
Gary Neville's type, where he just stays back. There's the defensive fullback. And then there's the inverted fullback. That's one of them. And then there's Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's the number 10 fullback.
The creator.
Then there's the one in rugby. There's one in rugby. I think there's actually, I found out this morning, there's one in American football as well. They are apparently in front of the running back who receives the ball sometimes from the quarterback, and their job is just to make space. They're in the middle, they're not even at the side.
With the name full back, it doesn't align there as well, does it?
I guess not, but then that's another thing about football, isn't it? Like the name full back is given to the players who today stand at the side.
True. Yeah,
and often are quite far forwards.
That's an evolution of football terms, which if John McKenzie were here, I'm sure he would say
he'd love it.
They used to be, those players used to be the ones who were fully back when everyone else was.
I like one reading of the history of football. The more, like, we're doing this series on Tifo at the moment with Jonathan Wilson, who's just writing the history of football for us. Is great. And one reading of it is just that, like, football is just like they changed the offside law 3 times and like everything changed every time. That's like the most impactful thing. All of the other stuff is sort of whatever, change the rule just from one extra player, one fewer player, and then suddenly,
pass back rule as well.
There's a great statistic that he included in a piece recently. It was we're talking about like the early 20th century, so in 19 something, right? And apparently, football fans were furious at the lack of goals in games. But the average number of goals in games was like 4.5.
Yeah, I remember reading this.
And they're like, "This is outrageous. We can't possibly have this." So they changed the offside law, and it went up to 100 or something. And it was like, that's much better. I sometimes wonder what those people would make of football now, given like how they didn't even use pass the ball. It seems like it was a completely different thing.
Goals are at an all-time high as well for compared to recent seasons as well. Yet still, we want more.
Well, I guess if every Liverpool game is going to be 4-3, then that absolutely makes sense. Right, who wants to explain percentiles to me? Because you mentioned before, Connor, the notion of using data to bust social media myths. I feel like percentiles are like the most popular one at the moment, where we say X player is in the 93rd percentile for passes into the bathroom or something. I don't know. But I feel as though I'm being tricked every time I see one of these.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of, to Mark's point, it's a way of being a little bit more granular with single numbers, and it's a way of dividing a player into all of the different facets of his game and saying, at a glance, Martin Zubimendi is not very, he doesn't make many tackles, but he makes a lot of passes into the final third, for example. And we can see that from his percentile ranking. If he is, in the top 10% of defensive midfielders, he makes more passes into the final third than 90% of defensive midfielders. He's in the 90th percentile. Yeah. It's a way of just basically giving it a score between 1 and 99.
Yeah.
So we can at a glance see that this is what he's good at, or this is what he does most frequently, which I think is an important distinction to make.
Yeah, and it's grounding it in context a little bit more, because if you said Martin Zubimendi averages, I'm going to pluck a number out, but like 7.4 through balls per 90, you'd be like, cool.
Yeah.
And you just shrug, but like you don't even need to know the number of how many he does, but you just need to know that relative to his position or relative to his peers across European football, he is one of the people who do it the most. And you can interrogate that further.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, doesn't that make me think, well, he plays on a team that has the ball more often, or is like, because those stats always present themselves as this player is better than all the other players in his position at this thing. But I always think, well, sure, this player plays in a team that does this, and therefore X, Y, and Z.
I think there's multiple ways that we like to slice and dice it as well, is to account for opportunity. I think it's worth saying that we do things from a defensive perspective. If someone is playing, I always use the example of Burnley. I feel bad for Burnley. If you're comparing a Burnley centre-back to a Manchester City centre-back, for example, of how many defensive actions they make, then it's unfair to compare like for like. So you need to adjust and account for their opportunity to do so. So often per 1,000 opponent touches, they do this action. And you can do the same in possession as well. So per 100 touches, which is what we like to do in some of our data visualizations, per 100 touches, this player likes to make more through balls than the average player within their position. So I think, when you're accounting for opportunity, it is crucial. And it is worth saying from a percentiles perspective, again, which we use on site, it is designed to be the gateway, the introduction to what this player does more or less of, rather than necessarily better or worse at.
Yeah.
I think we have a tendency, maybe again thinking about social media, it's this player's higher on something, so they are better at that.
Yeah.
It's just that no, they do that more. And then why is it that they do more? Maybe it's because they have more possession than the average team in that league, and that's starting to.
Maybe it's because they're better.
Maybe it's because they're better as well. But yeah, I think that the percentiles as a method of presenting information is a good introduction, but not necessarily the conclusion.
It also makes me think that, like, if I was a goalkeeper, I'd want to play on a team. Like, wouldn't you want, like, I remember when I was in school, I was a goalkeeper and I played on a team. And but I got so much of the ball.
More to do.
Yeah, I had way more to do. There were more opportunities to show my qualities, which I didn't have many of, But what if, I always think it's sort of weird. If you're a really, really good goalkeeper, you go to a team where you barely ever touch the ball. It seems stupid, doesn't it?
For some reason, Mark Schwarzer has come to mind in that as someone who went back and forth between, like, he had
Sure.
Chelsea time,
Yeah.
but then at, like, your Middlesbroughs or your Fulhams,
Bit
where
of
he
time
was
at Fulham. Yeah.
and he looked
Bring it
more,
on. Have a gourmet burger afterwards.
exactly, swim in the pool. Yeah.
An ad break. Hey, Tom, you hate XG now.
Yeah.
No, you don't hate XG, but you said to me before the podcast that modern XG makes you mad.
So angry.
Why?
No, it doesn't make me angry.
Oh,
I
okay.
think XG.
I've never seen you angry, for the
No,
record.
I don't
Have you
get
ever
angry.
been angry?
Top of my head, not really.
When
Are
was
you
the
in a
last
Are you in a
time?
relationship? Or
I am in a relationship. Yeah.
You've been angry.
I'm not. I'm
You've not
very,
been angry?
Very calm.
Really?
Very calm.
What's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? No,
Wow.
don't answer that question. That's horrible. But tell me why you hate XG, and then later tell me why the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
Yeah. Now, XG is obviously very useful.
Yeah.
But I think nowadays, and I'm sure the other guys will help me back me up here, that it's become used a little bit too often, and people are too quickly to jump to it because
Yeah.
it's an inherently noisy statistic. There are so many things going on. If anyone's ever played football and, a cross comes in, there are so many things which can go wrong, which means that you're just going to absolutely blaze it over the bar,
Yeah.
which isn't yet necessarily taken in by a lot of XG models. Even like a whole season of XG data in a lot of cases isn't enough to go and conclude this player's a good finisher, this player's a bad finisher.
The data boys always want more, don't
We
they?
always want
They're
more.
hungry for more.
We
Tom.
always want more. And it's, I think there are players, for example, who are incredibly skilled finishers. I'm thinking, off the top of my head, there are players who are great ball strikers. You've got Benjamin Sesko, for example, just moved to Manchester United. I think he's always going to overperform XG or come close to it,
Right.
because he can hit the ball very well from distance. Kevin De Bruyne is another player who kind of, to me, pops into my mind. There are kind of innate finishers as well. There's Robert Lewandowski is the one who sticks in my head. There was a goal he scored, I think, always use this example, away to Tottenham when they won 7-1, was it?
Right.
Edge of the box, back to goal, and he span and just right in the bottom corner. Didn't even have to look, just knew where the goal is.
Yeah.
And in these cases, expected goals is going to tell you that they are a great finisher and that they will, over the course of a season, over the course of 2 seasons, overperform because they have done for the last 5, 6, 7 years. It's just what they do. I think there are a lot of players in this middle ground who are going to be subject to a lot of variance, who people put a lot of stock into XG to say, well, Hugo Ekitike was Europe's top 5 leagues, the worst performing player last season in terms of expected goals.
AKA he's
Yeah,
Expected
exactly.
goals relative to goals scored.
Right.
Exactly.
Can I pause you to ask a question about how, and I'm sure you're going to tell me there's different models and they do them differently, but the one thing I'm never quite sure on is where the data that they're feeding, the shot location data that they're feeding in comes from, like which leagues. So with an XG in the Premier League, for example, is it just in the Premier League, or is the XG model from shot location from shots that were taken in other top 5 leagues or in the Championship, or is it all of football? Or
Well, I believe this is the kind of thing that they're working to kind of fine tune. And that's the problem with putting too much stock into XG, is that there's a long way to go, and data analysts realize that there's a long way to go to make XG better.
yeah,
One example, we did a piece on it a couple of months ago, is off target shots. A lot of time, a player can miss, graze a post every single time they shoot. Another player can put it out of the stadium every time they shoot.
Yeah.
But they're given the same kind of, they miss a target, their expected goals on target, which is another metric we can use, is 0.
right.
There are a lot of different things that we can do. We can adjust XG to, a specific kind of player. We can say that Lionel Messi's XG is not the same as Robert Hoofs, for example.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that we can do to continue making expected goals better.
Has Messi taken enough shots to make a reliable XG model, just like Messi's expected goals model?
Probably over the course of his career.
But an 18-year-old striker hasn't.
And
Exactly.
probably not Robert Huth.
Right.
Probably.
But maybe headers.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But, with all of these things in mind, analysing a game's worth of expected goals is really, again, like we said before, it's indicative. It can tell us that Liverpool let's not say deserved, because that's not true either.
Yeah.
But, 9 times out of 10, they will have beaten Burnley because
They
they
would
had
have been
2.5
expected to.
expected goals. The other team had 0.4.
Yeah.
But that's it. We
It's
can't drill into it anymore than
the
that.
use of single game. This is one of my favourite things about John McKenzie. He's catching some straights. He's not here. But one of my favourite things is he will forever tell me, if I ever try to use single game XG to make any point, he'll say to me, Joe, you simple fool. You obviously can't use single game XG to make a point about a game. But he does it all the time. Like, if there's a game that goes like the opposite way to what he expects or the opposite way to what he wants or whatever, he'll the first thing he'll say is like, look at the XG value. And I go, oh, I see. Both sides of the coin, John McKenzie.
To be honest, I mean, we're all guilty of it, I think,
Yeah.
depending on
It is fun.
It is fun. But I think that's the thing of knowing it's important to know either when not to use data or when to place more stock in data. If you are going to use it, you can sort of fill it with caveats and context. And I think as a personality, I think you know me well enough to know that I do that a lot with everything that I say in general life, fill it with context and caveats. But I think in the use of data within football and more generally, it's understanding that it's not black and white. It's a really grey area. There's so much kind of muddiness to using data. There's blind spots to certain models, expected goals being maybe one of them. And I've sort of trained in a research background, and I think that a lot of the papers that I've written in the past and the research papers that I've read actually themselves don't necessarily have too many strong conclusions, because they outline what they did, they show the results, and they'll say, and there's, here's the strengths, here's the limitations. It's not necessarily world changing. But I think, again, maybe I'm speaking more broadly, but I feel like we kind of do live in a society now that wants the black and white. Is he good or is he not?
Well, it's football, isn't it? It's like, I mean, the aim of any football conversation is to, we talked about this before, is to divine the truth, right? It's like, it's to find out what the reality is. Now we feel as though data can help us do that to an even greater degree.
But with great power comes great responsibility.
Well, indeed, Toby Maguire.
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed
No, I do
it
think
does.
that's the case, and I think that sometimes people are. I don't want to, sit on a high horse here, but I think sometimes people, again, thinking about social media, but often in, media more generally, will present data, but not necessarily insight. And I think what we are always striving for is insight. And I always remember that kind of distinction between the sort of the three sections I'm going to come on to. And it was from someone called Gary Gallade. He was very prominent in the football analytics space. We sort of got it off the ground in some ways, sadly no longer with us. But I remember watching a video where he basically said, well, you've got data. So it might be that Arsenal took 10 shots in the game. Okay, well, that's data. It's raw material, really. There's not a lot that you can really do with that because it's not grounded in any context. But what you can then do, so raw material being like, it's like a block of wood, is what he said. But you can shape a block of wood into something more meaningful. So you can go from data. Well, exactly. For example, you can turn data into information. I'm going to stick with this, Joe.
Yeah.
You can turn data into information. Say, okay, well, Arsenal had 10 shots in that game. How does that compare with the rest of their season? How does that compare with last season? How does that compare with everyone else in the league? You're starting to chip away at the wood and maybe craft that owl, shall we say?
What kind of owl is it?
I was going to go more for a chair or a table. But we can stick with owl.
A beautiful decorative owl.
It's a beautiful decorative owl, and then you go from information to insight, which is then, okay, this is really meaningful. So that blob that was initially a block of wood, it was then a blob of wood, and now it is a really perfectly curated owl.
What type of owl?
Owl.
Is it an eagle owl, a snowy owl, a barn owl?
Lovely barn owl.
It's a barn owl. They are good.
And it means something. What it was initially was raw material, it was data, and now it is something that is grounded in context, it's meaningful, it's insight. And the point I do want to make is that I think a lot of things that used at the moment with data is still kind of at the data level, and it needs to go that bit further to make it into something that's genuinely insightful. And that's hopefully where we come in our jobs and this sort of conversation. But I think that there's still sometimes a bit of a misuse of data to only keep it as data.
What is your favourite type of bird of prey?
I knew you were going to say this.
I think it tells you a lot about someone. This, you know.
Do you know what? This is very off piece, but I'm a big fan of the music band The Eagles.
Okay,
Therefore, every time I see something related to Eagles,
right.
I like it.
Fair
So
enough.
Philadelphia Eagles, I had a sweatshirt, Philadelphia Eagles,
Right.
because it connected with Eagles, the music band.
Mm.
So
Well, they're a mighty category of bird, you know.
yeah. I also affiliate with the Eagle.
I'm interested, Joe. You said a barn owl was a good owl.
Yeah.
What are your kind of
What's a bad
metrics for
owl?
a good owl?
Well, an owl, I think, has to appear wise. That's the first thing, because we all associate owls with wisdom. So if an owl doesn't look wise or it looks goofy, it's a owl. You know, get it out of here straight like that. Barn owls, they live in barns. Where better to live? It's very Christmassy, you know.
Drafty.
It is drafty, but that's why they have the extra plumage. And also, I will say that, like, unlike the snowy owl, which takes most of the attention, the barn owl is an expert hunter, lives in the dark. No one's talking about it. It's very much what the donkey is to the horse. I think we had this conversation on the podcast. I think we actually did a few weeks ago. What the donkey is to the horse is what the barn owl is to the snowy owl.
So an underrated owl.
It's an underrated owl for sure.
Right.
Although it's a very commonly known owl, at least in the UK. I feel like barn owl, one of the top known owls out there.
Yeah. Also having a bit of a comeback at the moment, barn owl population.
Are they?
A positive story.
Is there more barns?
There are more barns.
Wow. Because we know the population of barn owls is directly correlated to the number of barns. You can only have one in a barn.
And the London Borough of Barns in particular.
Exactly.
The population skyrockets.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's a lot of poop around, though, isn't there? Yeah.
Good PR for barn owls.
Good thing. Well, I was going to ask you guys, but I'll ask you off air now, because it feels as though we've wrapped up that bit about birds. Speaking of B words, though, that begin with a B.
That's a reach.
Do you like it? You met Billy Beane.
I did.
Who was played by another B, Brad Pitt, in the film Moneyball. You went to, where'd you go? Northern Ireland to meet him?
Belfast.
You went to Belfast to meet Billy. What was he doing there?
He was going to the Open Golf. He was very excited to see Scotty Scheffler.
Right. Right. I've heard of Scotty Scheffler. He's a big golf player, isn't
And yeah, the Brad Pitt comparison wasn't too flattering. He was quite a handsome dude.
he? Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear, because you always see the real people behind the actors, and you think, come on. You know, I always remember, like, when Joaquin Phoenix played Johnny Cash, I was like, come on. God, Johnny Cash is a wonderful singer, one of the greatest songwriters of all time, but he was ugly. Come on.
I didn't mind that.
You didn't
Good
mind
film,
that?
Walk the Line. Yeah, I didn't mind that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was actually pretty accurate.
I didn't mind it, but, like, are you saying you think Joaquin Phoenix and Johnny Cash are equal levels of attractiveness? What does the data say?
I don't know. Have you seen the new Bob Dylan film as well? I thought that was accurate.
I have. And again, young Bob Dylan was actually very attractive, I would say. I thought young Timmy Chalamet was pretty good in that film, actually. I'm not a huge Chalamet fan, but I thought he did an absolutely fine job, didn't he?
It was a very good film.
Yeah.
Billy Beane.
Billy Beane, yeah. I genuinely forgot what we were talking about. What do you make of Billy Beane? Because a lot's made of him.
Super bright guy.
Was he standing in the sun, or was it?
No, it was
It's not funny, was it? That wasn't funny. I shouldn't have interrupted. That was one word. That's
Let
one
Connor
where I
talk, Joe.
Yeah,
for
sorry,
God's
Connor.
sake.
Go on, Connor.
It was actually in a little lodge in Belfast. I think just how switched on he is and how aware he is of his own limitations. Like, he wasn't a data guy himself. He was more, as he describes it, the Trojan horse. He was the first guy to kind of be like, maybe these spreadsheet guys know a thing or two, because he was operating Oakland A's, who were operating on relative shoestring budgets. So they had to look for some other edge. So I think that wisdom to know what I don't know, and also that he could be that conduit, because back then, you know, there was still that huge divide between the boardroom level and, you know, coaches, players. So he's kind of the one who, like, what he said to me is they could never level the accusation, well, you've never played, which is, you know, still a huge thing across sport.
Yeah.
Whereas he was that guy who said, well, I've experienced in this and I trust these guys. And it was about that communication, but also he had, like, such steadfast, like, almost stubbornness to be like, drown out outside noise. Like, we believe in what we're doing. So it's kind of, you need that blend between the communication, but also conviction. So I thought it was really fascinating conversation.
That's the hardest thing, I think, isn't it? Is like I often think this about footballers, and I don't flatter myself or any of us here that we're working in a position which is anywhere near the pressure of footballers. But to a relative degree, everybody experiences this within their career, where they have an idea and then they're challenged by other people, even in a polite way. And I find it that it's the hardest thing not to capitulate at the first hurdle. Like if I have an idea that other people think, well, maybe that's not right for these reasons, I go, no, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have ever brought it up. Whereas to be a Premier League footballer, to be a Billy Beane, to be someone that we've heard of that is a big player in sports or whatever, you sort of have to be a bit of a, not like in a negative way, but kind of a psycho about like your vision and about your idea. You in many ways you just have to like. I guess that's why people use the term belief or self belief when they refer to this sort of thing. But when I don't know about you guys, but when I experience that in my life, I sort of get a tiny insight into like how crazy and how much self-belief those top level professionals have, because it's nuts to like keep ramming your head against the wall, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I've been exactly the same in the past. I continue to crumble when someone does query and question my thoughts on certain things, but you do have to have that, as you say, steadfast belief. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, with the Oakland A's example with Billy Beane, initially, because it was novel at the time, that it did require him to have even more belief, because it wasn't linear, that we are starting to use this, therefore we can grow more belief, and it is continuing to work. It failed initially, if for want of a better phrase. It didn't work as well as it should have initially, and he had to have even more strength and conviction in what he was doing. And then obviously Oakland A's did well as a consequence. Did he speak about that as well, of having almost the tunnel vision?
I think it's exactly that. He didn't really care, which is a great attribute to have. But I think Liverpool experienced the exact same thing. Their transfer committee was lambasted at first. Michael Edwards was labelled, data guru, laptop nerd, that kind of thing, and it didn't work at first. And it's kind of like, especially when you have that commitment to a long-term idea, to be able to drown out the initial bumps in the road is pretty admirable.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think it probably is like maybe the thing I find most admirable about all top Premier League players, the amount of self-belief that they have to have in order to think, no, I'm good enough to be a Premier League footballer.
How much of that is acquired versus just congenital within them?
Right. Like, how much of it is like part of culture of coming through the Premier League academies? For example?
you have to develop a thick skin. I mean, Eze being an example, not quite the same, but like being dropped or released by Arsenal, taking the long way around, and now he's back at Arsenal. We see it as, okay, that is a really driven guy, which he absolutely is, but he must have had times where he was doubting whether he could play in the Premier League after being dropped by Arsenal.
Yeah.
But it is just learned behaviour, people around him and stuff. So,
well, it's sort of like, makes me think of this comparison comes up a lot, but it makes me think of the film Whiplash. I guess academies and all of like youth football is basically just like one big sieve that like sieves out anybody that isn't going to make it, and then the final people that do make it. Yeah. Of course, they are able to weather horrible storms and deal with like awful things that ordinary people shouldn't be expected to deal with. Yeah. And then we all put them on telly and we watch them for 10 years. Yeah. And then they break their knees. It's a good system. John said something on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, talking about broken knees. No one's knees were broken. He said, what did he say? He said, he made an observation about data. I think he regretted it. I think it was slightly off the cuff, but he meant it with good intentions. His point was to suggest that from a coaching perspective, data is still considered like supplementary when it comes to tactical innovation. That he said that like data hasn't really done much to change how football is played outside of a couple of like caveated examples, and that really it's still just sort of useful retrospectively. Do you agree with that? Like, can you think of areas where data has actively changed the way that a coach might approach a game tactically, for example, outside of set pieces, which I think was that one area that you raised?
That's what I was going to say. We spoke about it at the start with the long throws. I think that is something which data is telling us that this is the best way to do it, so we will do it. And I think, Brentford are a team who are always kind of on the cutting edge of things that are, the data says this is beneficial, so we're going to lean into it more than anyone else. And they always kind of get their rewards from that. Corners as well. I think we've seen that with Arsenal, the kind of, focusing on the delivery, focusing on the positioning of their players, focusing on getting the contact as close to goal as possible.
Yeah.
It's obvious, but it works. And the kind of one way I think data is kind of straying into open play is similarly with the location of shots. I think we're seeing the distance, the average distance of shooting has plummeted over the last couple of years.
Right.
The average quality.
So that means that like that's telling coaches that if they want to score more goals, they have to shoot from closer to the goal.
I think it's telling, for example, Pep Guardiola, Enzo Maresca, these kind of coaches, that if you work the ball closer to the goal and you kind of take that extra touch, again, Brentford, another team, Johan Visser is a player who's very good at this.
Yeah.
So many examples, if you really slow the footage down and have a look, he will take a touch where someone else might have had a shot. And that
Let me
does
channel
bleed
John
into
McKenzie
coaching.
though. He would tell you, I think, that like football coaches knew that before the data told them. And so therefore that's not an example of the data like changing the way that football is played. It just like reinforces their existing belief.
Yeah, they just had a way to, or have a way to quantify it now.
Right.
But it's the causality, I think, is because I agree with the set piece one. I think that's an interesting one. It's the causality of the data actually informing what's going on compared with maybe different sports. We spoke about baseball before, basketball being another.
Yeah.
But it's actually then being the catalyst for change rather than, oh, now we have a way to quantify and measure what we've already seen going on in terms of a tactical evolution change. It's a difficult one. To be honest, I broadly do agree with John. I do think that there's not been too much that's impacted the way that football's played based on data. I do still have some examples of it maybe being, if not, used and used to great effect, even if it doesn't necessarily evolve the game sort of more broadly. But I actually wrote a piece on this, and it's titled "When Will Data Impact Tactics in Real Time?"
When did you write that?
Pretty on the nose. I did this January the 10th, 2025.
Wow.
This year.
He's so ahead of the game, isn't he?
John, clearly not a fan of my stuff. But there's a couple of examples that I gave, and one of them was using a company called Catapult, who often you might see the GPS vests that the players wear. And they are connected to a platform that they have called Match Tracker. And essentially it in real time combines the video with the location data, and it then goes to you can see it sometimes on the bench when they're looking at those screens, but it will go to a data analyst in the stand, and they will, again, talking about game model, a certain team might be, and I know from speaking to someone who uses this, have found that you can say, okay, well, we're going to define too much space as, I don't know, let's say a 2 meter radius around a player. And you can see that our player, our attacking midfielder, is getting into pockets of space on the right-hand side. And we can see this using GPS data from the first half, such that you can then show instances of when that's happening. And then at half-time, you can say, make sure you're getting into this space because there's gaps here. So that's more on like a match level sort of basis, but you can still use data and combined with your game model to say that actually this is something that we can quantify, and this can inform how we're going to win the game on a sort of game-by-game basis. The other one was using similar GPS wearable devices, and it was a company called Baron Sports, and they basically said that they could track the distance between players going across the pitch and sort of between the lines, banks of 4, whatever it may be.
Oh, cool.
And he said that during a game, we measured how much the opposition was pressuring our team, or the team that we were working with, and the defensive and midfield lines were getting just that bit too close together. So the information that we had based on these wearables meant that it informed what we would do in terms of making a substitution. So we ended up playing with a back 5, and those lines ended up spreading out, and we could track that change pre-post substitution.
As it was happening.
As it was happening. So again, I still broadly agree with the principle of it, but there are examples of just data being used on a sort of match level basis that can still be useful in informing what goes on the pitch.
I think the other one that came up as an example, it was a John caveat when someone wrote in, so it was about injuries as well, like injury prevention. Yeah, it's good in that area too. Injury prevention, obviously recruitment being the key one. I know that was spoken about with John as well. Like he's not denying that hasn't been. He was saying apart from recruitment. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think recruitment and injury do probably sit outside of tactics. It's a nuanced debate, and again, I broadly agree that it hasn't had a profound effect on it. It allows us to measure and quantify things that we maybe couldn't before. But I don't think it's been a driver necessarily. I think the main thing is that football is such an open sport, right? And there are so many variables in every single game. And it's very hard to say we will play better if we play an inverted fullback against this team, because you just don't know. Like, there are so many things which could go wrong. There are so many things which happen along the way, which means that you can't really say that.
And I think it's interesting that when you went to speak to Billy Beane, Luke Bourne was there, and he kind of echoed this point, saying that there was no correlation. But obviously in American sports, you're able to kind of complete sports a little bit more, I think, with data because it's a little bit more closed than football.
Yeah, I think so. But I think he kind of suggested that we could get towards that level. I think it's like...
This is Luke Bourne, football data scientist.
Yeah. So I think like kind of an analogy I was thinking of last night was it's kind of like we model weather, which is an incredibly complex system. And 3 weeks out, we might not get it right. But if we focus on tomorrow and kind of relating that to like phases of play and like, I don't know, let's say we're focusing on our pressing, like that's kind of an optimization problem in a way. It's where we space out players along our front line and how they interact with each other. So I think it's like, it hasn't had an impact yet, but we have like these complex possession value models. We're getting better at tracking all the off-ball run stuff. So I think we can focus and hone in on certain opportunities, you know, overlaps. It's like, what should we do in this situation if we're faced with, you know, a 3v2 or something like that? So I think it's, again, like baseball is so discrete. There's pitching, fielding, batting, but football, a lot more complex. But I think we can get to a stage where we compartmentalize certain areas and kind of work backwards through that.
That's why it's the best sport. Sorry, America. You lose again. That's the end, isn't it? Tom, thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Connor, thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
And thank you.
Oh, cheers.
Oh, sorry, Steve.
Yeah, happens every time.
Thanks, Steve.